Okay, let's get started. Good. Hello, everybody. And I'll start by introducing myself. Hello? Yes, good. Okay, let's keep going. I'm Kathie Lowry. I was formerly the Chief Development Officer at Larkin Street Youth Services until my retirement in 2016, and I am now the chair of the fundraising committee for Rising Up, along with my fellow committee members and co-hosts who are co-hosts for today's event. And they are Robert de Oliveira. I don't think he's joined yet, but he'll be coming on. He's a business entrepreneur. Claudia, who is here. She's the interim VP of advancement at First Place for Youth. Miriam Muduroglu, who many of you on this call know as community activist and philanthropist, and Gail Roberts, who is the current Chief Development Officer at Larkin Street. Also, we're fortunate to have with us today Steph DeMong, who is our production manager, and she's going to make all the technology work. So we are delighted that you joined us today for a roundtable discussion on the myths and facts about homelessness, particularly as they apply to young people in San Francisco who are experiencing homelessness. Launching our discussion today will be Abigail Stewart-Kahn. She is the interim director of the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, HSH for short. And then we'll hear from Sherilyn Adams, the executive director of Larkin Street Youth Services, who will be talking about the Rising Up initiative and how it fits into the larger picture of homelessness in San Francisco. So during their presentations, please feel free to enter questions or suggestions into the chat box, and we will get to those. We'll address those in the Q&A section after the remarks. And also one thing to note, we are thinking of making these roundtable discussions into a series. So what we'd like to know from you, first of all, is if this would interest you. And secondly, if it does, what are some of the things that you would like to hear more about? So you can enter that into the chat box as we go along as well. And then Miriam will close today's discussion with her own personal message and a call to action. So the usual the usual instructions that we all get on these calls, please mute during the presentations. And we will also be recording the session today and sending the link to you next week, along with some other materials and a survey, which we hope you will all complete. So let's get started. I would now like to introduce Abigail Stewart-Kahn, who will talk with us about homelessness in San Francisco, the myths and the facts. A little bit about Abigail. Prior to her current position, she was the Director of Strategy and External Affairs at HSH, and prior to that, Abigail has held a number of leadership positions in the nonprofit community, ranging from everything from on-the-ground social work to being a developer and an implementer of policy. So Abigail, I am going to turn it over to you.
Oh, suddenly everyone went away.
Can you see us?
Now I can.
Okay.
Hello, lovely folks. Thank you for that nice introduction, Kathie. I want to thank Larkin Street for your leadership of this initiative, and to the Rising Up fundraising committee and chairs. Thank you so much for this tremendous effort. We were together at one point, some of us at Mariam's house, and I really wish we were there right now.
Yes, I do too.
It was really pretty there, prettier than. I'm actually not in my own house, and this is not a fake backdrop. This is real. I've been asked that several times today. This is my in-laws' house. So I am thrilled to be with you all, and thank you, Kathie and Steph, for all the work to organize. I am supposed to talk to you about homelessness myths. I'm also supposed to pay attention to my chat so that Steph keeps me on time. And I really want to focus on youth homelessness today. So first of all, thank you all for your interest in this. I hope everybody and your families are holding up, that you're safe. My kids came home from school a couple weeks ago, and they said, you know, they didn't come home from school. What am I talking about? They finished their Zoom school. And at dinner that night, they were talking about a message that they'd gotten from the head of school, and it had something to do with a boat. And I was kind of confused, and they were talking too fast. And so everybody kind of slowed down, and they explained to me this boat analogy, which I don't think the school made up, but has been really resonant with me, in that We are in the middle of a storm, a COVID storm, which is now highlighted and has exacerbated equity issues in our country that have gone back since the formation of our country. So we're probably in two storms. And I'm in a really nice boat. This is what my kids said. We have a really nice boat, Mom. I have an English mother. And we have a really nice boat, Mom. We think our boat's like a cruise ship. They've never been on a cruise ship, but they hear they're fancy. And then we talked about what different boats might look like. Like if you had a smaller apartment, that was more of a dinghy. And people experiencing homelessness have no boat. And so they're in the middle of maybe like a hurricane and a tsunami, and there's no boat. And so it's not to say, I mean, honestly, being in a cruise ship in the middle of a tsunami and a hurricane would be pretty darn scary. So we all have kind of a right to our own responses, our own grief, and our own fears right now. And we have to realize that we're relatively safe. And so my job, have been in it since 2 weeks before COVID hit. It was a really, really strange time to become an interim department head. I'm happy to talk about that more. My job is to care about the people who aren't in a boat, who have no boat at all. So let's talk about why they don't have a boat. And this is where we get into myths and truths. People don't have a boat because there aren't enough boats in San Francisco. It is not through their own weakness or failure. And in this case, I, of course, will now pivot to houses and homes. There isn't enough housing. I mean, it's so obvious that housing is the most valuable commodity in San Francisco. Property is the most valuable commodity. Even in the midst of a massive fiscal crisis, that is getting us close to, certainly beyond 2008, the property values of the homes that if you own your home or your rent are very high. And that's your stability. It's the building around you, protecting you, and it's a stability in the time of financial crisis. It's the hottest commodity in San Francisco. It's more important than a reservation at the hottest restaurant, right? And we don't build enough of it, and we can talk about all the reasons why that is. Some of it's politics, some of it's not. Actually, most of it's politics and what we want our city. Yeah, Sherilyn's like, yeah, I was like trying to think of what wasn't politics, but it's what we want our city to be. So people like my husband, who's a native San Franciscan, people his age have an image of what San Francisco was, and many of his friends can't live in the city anymore. In fact, none of his friends can afford to live in the city anymore except him. And we live in a 2-bedroom apartment, and that's a choice we're making. And the city has changed around them. And many people embrace that. He's in a building south of Market for his work. He loves being there. He wants more housing. He wants all parts of the city to develop. He's comfortable with a sort of Manhattanization of San Francisco. Many people aren't. Many people came here, they left New York. They didn't want that anymore. So we have to think about housing development and housing stock. If we had enough housing for people, our system of care has the resources and the know-how to house even the sickest and most vulnerable among us. When we zoom in on young people, they are resilient and they are flexible, and they are more often than not, much, much less sick because they've been homeless for a lot less time. People get sick as they stay out on the streets. If I was out on the streets for a few nights, I would develop a drinking problem. I know that to be true about myself. And it would evolve from there. Thank you, Steph. And so what we need to think about is, how do we build more housing? And then how do we pair the housing with the right services? And Rising Up, which Sherilyn will go into, gives us the opportunity to work with young people who can problem solve their way out of homelessness with a little bit of help from the system, or who need an interim amount of help from the system called rapid rehousing to advance themselves. And most young people don't need help from the system long term, but Rising Up fits within a system of care that would allow somebody who did need something longer than Rising Up to get access to that. Rising Up is a critical component of this department's goal to reduce youth homelessness by 50%, and a core feature in our citywide commitment to end homelessness among youth of color and LGBTQ youth. So again, back to that, the storms we're in around equity and around COVID, needing more housing. This is an opportunity to build some pretty nice boats for some young people during this storm. I will briefly touch on what has happened. I estimate that we had 5,000 people on the streets before, unsheltered homeless on the streets. We had many, many, many thousand housed. For every person that we end their homelessness, 3 become homeless in their place. When COVID began, because of policy decisions that I needed to make to align to Department of Public Health guidance, we probably have doubled the street population in San Francisco. And so we feel it. Those are people without boats. And when you have too many people without boats, it risks our community health. And so I will just end with, COVID has shown us in such a visceral way that all of our health is intertwined. And that housing is healthcare. So if you're in a cruise ship right now, like I am, you're safe. If you're not, you're not. But people who are trying to climb into your cruise ship or who are struggling on the edges of society, because this is a public health crisis, they can affect my health and your health. So even if you don't care about that person in the tent, even if you blame them for being where they are, which is not my guess about everybody on this call, you still have to care that they get housed so that they don't get everyone else sick, so that we don't get them sick and they don't get us sick. So I'll leave it at that. Our health is intertwined, housing is healthcare, and Rising Up is a tremendous opportunity to help people get into pretty nice boats during these storms.
Thank you, Abigail. As always, eloquent, thoughtful, and you've given us a lot to think about. I'd like to now introduce Sherilyn, who is, as many of you know, she will talk with us more about the Rising Up initiative. And many of you know Sherilyn. She is the executive director of Larkin Street Youth Services. She's held this position for, I think, over 15 years. And during that time, Sherilyn has established herself on the local, state, and national level as absolutely one of the most important voices on behalf of youth homelessness. So Sherilyn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kathie. Hi, all. Super glad to be here. Agree with Abigail. Would much rather be joining you in the beautiful home of Mariam and being able to see you, and someday again we'll be able to greet each other with a handshake or a hug, and that'll all be great. And I really want to echo Kathie's words that Abigail, that was really, it's so poignant and so helpful for framing the conversation. And I feel like every time I get a chance to hear you speak, I get to learn from you. So I appreciate that a great deal. And I especially appreciate it Friday at 4 when I know the kind of week you have every single week now for the past 10, which in COVID time, as we know.
All right. I think I've aged about 10 years in 3 months.
That's COVID time. That's what'll do it. That's what'll do it.
I look different than my bio shot, which Kathie generously pulled when I looks like a 12-year-old is running the department.
Good. She went straight from preschool or middle school to her job. So I want to put a little, I love the boat analogy, and I have been thinking a lot about and heard folks refer to the pandemic of COVID as one pandemic, and the pandemic of racism is sort of another, right, pandemic. So we are dealing with the intersections of 2 pandemics at this time. And that is true for for all of the populations of folks who are homeless, whether that's experiencing homelessness, whether that's adults or families or veterans. Or young people, right? That we do see high disproportionality in terms of who's impacted by homelessness in our cities and in our country for lots and lots of different reasons, often as a result of sort of systemic and institutionalized racism, and for young people, often homophobia that has sort of is part of the reasons behind why we have such a high number of young people experiencing homelessness across this country, and why so many are unsheltered, particularly in San Francisco and in our state. And as Abigail mentioned and noted, that the decisions needed to, the public health decisions that needed to be made in order to slow the spread of COVID had a dramatic impact on our ability to bring people inside. So the increase of folks living outside includes young people. So I'm going to just sort of paint a picture of what's happened a little bit over the past few months in terms of our response, our organizational response, and importantly, the organizational response of all of the providers within Rising Up. So Larkin Street, First Place for Youth, 3rd Street Youth Center and Clinic, The Center, At the Crossroads, 5 Keys, Lyric, and the Homeless Youth Alliance have really all come together in our continued work together with the city to partner to be responsive to the needs of young people during this time. And a part of that has been both, and to work in collaboration with the city to do a couple of things, which is to be responsive to the needs of young people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk for homelessness during this time, and to keep our staff safe, right? So we had to sort of 2 approaches that we were all trying to do and walk together in doing. I think it's important to note that during this time, we have been able to keep our services open. And when we think about Rising Up, as Abigail mentioned, Rising Up has both the getting folks housed, so moving folks into their own housing with a time-limited subsidy. It also is about prevention and problem solving and about getting folks into our access points. So how we get folks into housing, how we assess folks is to be able to talk with them, see what's going on in their lives, and make sure that we can assess them for either needing prevention or problem solving. So can we get you someplace? Is there a family member you can stay with? Can we temporarily house you while we're resolving something else? So that was happening pre-COVID. In COVID, that looks a little bit different because we need to be able to, folks might be sheltering in place. They might not have a family they can shelter in place. The person they might have been sheltering in place with may no longer be safe, right? So we do have a number of young people in our prevention and problem solving sort of group that we now have in hotels while they're either waiting for units through Rising Up, or they're trying to get into apartments, or while we're working to resolve their homelessness in some other way. So we have continued to be able to house folks. Rising Up has about 100, and Kathie will correct me if,
124.
Thank you. 124 currently housed in Rising Up, and a number of young people in housing search.
80.
There has been ongoing ability to move folks into housing across all of the organizations that are providing housing during the past 10 weeks, which I think is fabulous. So Brilliant Corners has done an amazing job of continuing to bring units, get units ready so young people can move into units. We have about 80, I think 80 folks-ish or so in housing search right now across. And there's been probably the numbers of, I think the last numbers you saw in your report were 250. I'd say there's 350 youth by now who've been served through the prevention and problem solving work that the youth access points are doing. What has also part of Rising Up, part of what the work that we're doing with youth across in the system, the youth homelessness system, is to be able to make sure, in addition to getting housed, because the subsidy is not forever, is to link them with behavioral health supports and with employment. We have seen a reduction in the number of young people who are employed right now because they're not able to be employed. So we are working with them to expand to pay for their portion of the subsidy, to make sure they're getting food cards, to addressing their basic needs during this time that they might not have employment. And we are seeing an increase in the behavioral health needs of young people across the continuum in housing. But I would say in Rising Up, where most folks are living maybe with a roommate or on their own, the isolation and the sort of fears and kinds of depression and anxiety that all of us might be experiencing are just much more profound for young people who have histories of trauma and have other kinds of issues that they might have come into the housing with. Case managers across all of the providers within Rising Up have consistently and continually provided remote and in-person support to young people in the Rising Up portfolio. And we have continued to keep access points open primarily at 134 Golden Gate, with staff from the other access points, with staff from the other organizations working out of that site. And we've continued to be able to, again, provide a range of services to young people so that we can keep making sure we're getting as many young people inside as we can. We cannot bring young people into our shelter. We cannot bring young people into other shelters. So really, it has been so amazing for young people to have this resource, and us to be able to house young people during the time of COVID. I think I am probably out of time. So I'm going to stop talking because we really want folks to ask questions, and go on mute.
Okay. Thank you, Sherilyn. You did a great job of putting things in the frame, in the great frame that Abigail had set up. We are going to open up the session for questions. We have, actually, I was going to say we have a few that were put in the chat box, but we don't. So now we have the opportunity for folks to ask the questions that I think Sherilyn and Abigail did a good job of setting the platform for. So is there anyone who would like to get started on that?
I would like to ask a question.
Yes.
My name's Valley, and hello, and it's wonderful to hear you speak, and we so appreciate all the work you do for our city, and our city is going through a terribly difficult time. I'm actually a native. I was born here in 1951, so I have definitely seen a lot transpire in the city. I have a couple questions. The first one is building housing is a long-term solution for our city, and it's not a short-term solution. What are the short-term solutions that you're thinking about? So as the city opens up now, we will be able to have a livable city and not see the suffering on the streets. That's my first question. And then the second question I want to ask you, is the city expecting an exodus of a lot of the young tech workers, since they'll no longer be required to go to their offices? And what impact would that have on our housing stock?
Sherilyn, do you want me to take those?
Those are, why don't you start? It seemed like Abigail questions, and I'll fill in if there's anything.
Okay. Hi, Valley. Great questions. Yes, so building like a cruise ship is definitely I'm getting really into this metaphor. I'm sorry. It might be a Friday afternoon kind of thing. But building housing is a long-term solution. And to be clear, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, I look way more tired with my glasses off. Let's do that. Is always working on a pipeline for building more affordable and permanent supportive housing. We have thousands of units coming online in the next couple years. So those have been being built for 5 years. So you're 100% correct. And we need to do more and more of that. There are organizations in our community like Tipping Point, who is a major funder for Rising Up, who are working to really speed up the pace of housing and reduce the cost of housing. So just so we know, we're working on that. Rising Up's not about that. What we hope we will see, I hope there's an opportunity. I'm a just sort of relentless optimist, but this has been a really difficult pandemic, obviously, and people have lost their lives, and more people in San Francisco have lost their income than lives. And so we have this balancing act of, I think we may see more people experiencing homelessness, but we will likely see an easing up of the housing market. And so when we say building housing or creating exits from homelessness, specifically the Rising Up ones, none of those need to be built. They exist in the San Francisco and Bay Area market. And they existed and were findable by our partner Brilliant Corners before COVID. What I've asked Brilliant Corners recently is, has that gotten easier? And they're like, oh yeah. So somebody somewhere is leaving the city. These are not usually, to your second question, the tech folks at the moment, because we're not putting Rising Up people into high-end tech apartments at the moment, although maybe one day that would be nice. But we are losing people in the lower and middle classes of San Francisco at this point, which is sad and beneficial in terms of easing up the market. Bigger picture COVID, pulling back from young people and Rising Up. We are working on, and Sherilyn is one of the 2 community providers that's been asked to join a city and board of supervisor led advanced planning group. All these hotel rooms that we're opening for people experiencing homelessness, which are operating as shelters right now, we have really big plans to convert many of those rapidly to permanent housing. How many? We don't know. Do we need them all? Absolutely. Are some of the hotels wanting to take their hotels back and have guests? Yes. Will some of them want to sell to the city? Yes, they are already talking to us about that. Will we be able to unlock some one-time money to do that? Yes. How much? We don't know. As much money as we can unlock is the amount we will be able to purchase. So we have opportunities to build housing faster with creative projects. We have the opportunity to find more housing right now for things like rapid rehousing and problem solving. And we have the opportunity to convert things that we wouldn't have thought of as housing into housing for formerly homeless folks in a way that we have never, well, maybe in the last 20 years have not had in San Francisco. And so it is a time where if I think about it for too long, I actually start crying, how much grief there is in our world. And the people who are losing their lives, whether to racial killings or to COVID and losing their livelihoods, demand that we capture that moment. My understanding from my colleagues who've been in San Francisco longer than I am is that there is always talk about the silver lining of a downturn for people experiencing homelessness, and that we're never quite ready to grab the reins of that, like in 2008, to capture some of that expensive housing and convert it for middle and lower income people, including people who are formerly homeless, because we're too busy dealing with the crisis. And so we are lucky to have partners that are a whole group that are working ahead of this. And they call me once a week and they say, great, this is how much money I have for you so far. and Rising Up is a way to really, really quickly say to Brilliant Corners, go, and they call it taking down units, which just makes them sound way cool. So go take down units and hold them. And we have the homeless folks, we have the young people to put in them. So just let me give you an example. We were converting apartments for formerly homeless adults, and the city was willing to accept $1,400 for a SRO apartment in San Francisco. No bathroom, no kitchen. That's expensive. That was the highest end. My department didn't actually agree to that. We can talk offline about who did. But it was pushing the market rate up higher and higher, right? Because that's what the market was demanding. We are renegotiating down at 800 right now, 800 per unit. Is that still expensive for an SRO? Absolutely. Is it better than 1,400? Yes. So we got to build, we got to grab stuff while it's cheaper, and we got to convert. And then an exodus of tech workers? I mean, I don't know. I would have to ask. I don't have any friends in the tech industry. My husband does. My friends are in the medical world. I'm not sure why that is. So they're all really busy right now. But probably you all know those folks. And the surveys that I'm seeing is, previously it was like 1 in 3 San Franciscans or 1 in 3 Bay Area residents had thought about leaving the Bay Area, which was before COVID, but they were generally poorer folks. I wonder if that has shifted because people can permanently telecommute, as you say.
I can add just a little bit. I think I am on also the Mayor's Economic Recovery Task Force. And we have looked at sort of whether or not there's what will, like, for folks, part of looking at recovery is how many folks will come back into work in the city and what will that mean. So I think there is some expectation that folks may choose to live other places. And so part of the conversation potentially could be is, are there commercial spaces that could be currently that are commercial office spaces that could be converted in my world, my dream, like to work live spaces, right? So that we're thinking about the stock of buildings that we have, and are there ways that those could be used differently if folks are not going to be staying in the city, or if people have different options about how they work.
Thank you, Valley. That was a good question. Who's got another question?
I do, although I'm talking actually from my phone. I've got a couple questions about, what's the optimal kind of housing? So I've heard you talk about, it sounds like some youth are being housed kind of individually, some are in kind of group housing. The hotels sound like an amazing opportunity to kind of put a bunch of people in a place where you could then layer a program. But, what's the, so first is kind of what's the optimal kind of housing or the optimal kind of box to put people in? And then how do you value housing versus a kind of programmatic layer to get people kind of out of supportive housing and into kind of mainstream life as quickly as possible?
Great question. So when we think about young people, we think about having a portfolio of options available, different housing types for different young people. So young people experiencing homelessness are not a homogeneous group, right? So there are some folks who will need longer term housing and might be great candidates or permanent supportive housing. So needing housing that they could go into and stay in for a long time. Most young people can need a period of time to help rebuild skills, to stabilize, to address issues around trauma. And so for some, we selected a subsidy-based model, rapid rehousing, which is the subsidy is about 3 years, because most young people are going to be able to go into that housing option. It is one we can scale up and scale down. We can offer it in different places. Folks can live together. Folks can live on their own, depending upon sort of what their economic mobility looks like, right? So we have been putting folks in roommate situations. We've been putting folks in, studios. Really, as if the rents come down a little bit, we have more options for some young people. And then the hotel options for young people, the hotels that Abigail is referring to are hotels that have been designed for, and the intent behind that was to have folks come inside or come out of large shelters who were at risk, who had significant risks for COVID-related complications. So those are folks over 60 or with an underlying medical issue. So there are young people. We did stand up one of those hotels, Larkin Street did, for young people who have high risk for medical complications or complications related to COVID because of an underlying medical issue. Obviously, none of them are over 60.
But I've made it harder for young people to get sheltered right now.
Yeah. So
COVID has made it harder. So I'll just own that for Sherilyn. So which is something I was supposed to touch on in the beginning. Sorry, Kathie and Steph. We had 83% of our youth population, I think, Sherilyn, unhoused in our last point in time count, which is higher than the adult population. The families are sheltered. They're not housed, but they're sheltered, which makes them safer during COVID. When COVID hit, so we already had a too high percentage of unsheltered. We were putting things into place, the city, with all of our partners. We are continuing to bring on the first navigation center for young people at 888 Post. Those projects are moving forward. However, because 60 and up is such an enormous amount of our homeless population, that they are really getting the priority to come inside, right? Just like my kids, or if I had a 20-year-old, I had a 20-year-old nephew or a cousin around, he's much less vulnerable. He can get COVID, but he's probably not going to pass away. And so, but bringing him near my parents was dangerous, right? We're sort of all paying attention to these things now. So the young people that were already unsheltered at too high a rate now have less access to this expanded system of care, and we've paused shelter intake in the existing system of care. So I would imagine we have an even higher than 83% unsheltered. We brought on one young person temporary hotel. They're called shelter-in-place hotels, because you can shelter in place, Tim, I can shelter in place, but they can't, right? We brought in on one and worked collaboratively again with Larkin's leadership and many youth providing partners as they lead that emerging kind of system and partnership of care to fill a hotel with young people who are vulnerable to COVID, but most of them, just by definition of age, are not. Does not mean they are not vulnerable. They're highly vulnerable on the street to trauma, to further attack, to racist attacks to attacks based on homophobia. But they're not COVID vulnerable. And right now that is driving everything. So.
Thanks, Abigail. So I think we look at a portfolio or a range of options to address youth homelessness, and all of them, we hope most of them are time limited and folks are able to move on. I think rapid rehousing is a particularly good solution for young people, and having congregate and group sort of shared facilities can all small and safe, I like to call them, can also be good solutions for young people.
Thanks.
Do we have, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like, what is the future of navigation centers in a post-COVID world? That's an Abigail question, or a Department of Public Health, but I'm gonna let Abigail take it.
Oh yes, I talk about this all day long. So the mayor and I asked that question all day long. As you noticed, I said we are still building that navigation center. We are also still building one at 1925 Evans. There's also one that we had just gotten through all of the process approvals and the community process around at 33 Goff, which is in the middle of the city. So the mayor had committed to 1,000 new beds. They were all navigation center beds, Embarcaderos, been opened and so on, and had found her path to 1,000 new beds. That was what we needed pre-COVID. We probably need more now. Normally our shelter system, which includes navigation centers and traditional shelters like Next Door or MSC South or the Larkin, which is run by Larkin Street, had 2,200 placements on any given night, beds for people to sleep in. In a COVID world, following CDC and public health guidance, we estimate that capacity, we're not back there yet. We have to repurpose all these sites. We're in the process of repurposing the Larkin. Would be about 1,000. So we have lost half of our shelter capacity during this time, and we won't get it back until there's something changes with the virus. So what Dr. Colfax from the Department of Public Health keeps telling all of the department heads is, we've done incredibly well in San Francisco. We have had 44 deaths, which are incredibly sad and lower than every other community per capita. We have testing going. We are protecting our seniors. We're doing everything right. And the virus has not changed its plans for us, and we don't know that much more about it. And so we're stuck with these like masking 6 feet of distance things until we learn more about the virus and have better medical approaches.
Kathie, you're muted.
Carl, you mentioned from the Twitter perspective about the tech community, the question about the tech community moving out. Do you want to speak to that? Carl?
Sure. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It was less of a question, but I think Abigail was talking about, where housing could be impacted as, through COVID and more remote workforce. And I just think, again, we don't have enough information, but I think it's likely, with Google, Facebook, Twitter, many large tech companies basically saying work remotely if your job lends to it and you can, I think we will see a lot of dispersion, which, from my perspective, I sort of hope will level make a less competitive, more equal housing stock. I don't know that for sure. I'm not a real estate person, but it feels like that could happen.
Okay. Am I still on? No.
I have another question.
Yes.
All right, so listening to you, Abigail, it sounds like we're going to have a severe problem with unsheltered homeless people as a result of the navigation centers, unless we can offset it by absorbing new housing. And that the numbers of people who are living on the street now has really gone up. This is unsustainable for a lot of people who are living around town now also, as well as being absolutely horrible for the homeless. What is your view of the city over the next 6 months to a year? What is it going to be like to live here?
Oh, I wish I had a crystal ball on that one, but first of all, you've hit the nail on the head. So if we had 5,000 people who are unsheltered, I'm roughly estimating we have something like 8,000 unsheltered now. We haven't done a point in time count, and we won't do another one until 2021, January 2021. So we don't know. We haven't done a count. So this is all kind of, it's better than back of the envelope, but it's rough estimates. So if we previously were trying to solve for 5,000 unsheltered people by having 3,000 places for them to be while they moved into, for every shelter bed you need 3 to 6 exits, we now have to say, okay, we have 8,000 people who have somewhere to be. This is even before anyone becomes homeless again. So we took a static 8,000 unsheltered population and we wanted to move them into housing. We need 8,000 places for them to be. We have that many permanent supportive housing units in the city. They're full, not all of them. So some people will go that way. We need exits through problem solving and rapid rehousing, which are less expensive, and not everybody needs permanent housing. And we have better market ability now with everything we've been talking about, with people maybe moving out and housing costs changing. So I think the strategy of the department remains the same. Where people are is different, and what shelter can provide us is different. So Gavin Newsom famously said that shelter solves for sleep and housing solves homelessness. And so this has shown us that even more. We need to double down on our housing focus. And when I say housing, to your earlier question, I don't mean building. I don't even mean just whole buildings. I mean rapid rehousing through Rising Up. Problem solving as a housing exit. And we can talk about why that is. We need every kind of creative housing exit to take care of the 8,000 people who are unsheltered right now, and the more who will be coming in. So we have to increase our ability without as much shelter capacity to move people from street to ending their homelessness. We can do that. We moved 10 people from the Safe Sleep site at Fulton Mall yesterday into permanent supportive housing. They were already qualified through coordinated entry. Happy to talk about what that is. Key component of the Rising Up initiative for youth. We knew where they were. They were somewhat stabilized in this Safe Sleep site that we need to close as a city collectively towards the end of the summer. So the way we're winding it down is, hey, you're eligible for permanent supportive housing. I've got permanent supportive housing for you. You want to go home through Homeward Bound? That's a problem-solving solution. I'm going to help you get home. In adults, it's harder. We don't have very much rapid rehousing, but let's say we found some young people there who were perfect candidates for Rising Up. We don't have to have them come into a shelter before they can go to Rising Up. We can take them from the street to housing. So shelter takes care of things. It solves for sleep, and honestly, it solves for the uncomfortness. The discomfort, there we go. The discomfort of those of us who are housed, the pain and the heartbreak that we experience, or for some people, the anger and frankly disgust that housed neighbors feel when they see people experiencing homelessness. Mine is heartbreak, let's just to be clear. And so we're gonna be seeing a lot more homeless folks. But that doesn't mean we're not housing more of them. But we can't sort of tuck them away in these shelters. Navigation centers are humane shelter. Traditional shelters were very compacted, bunk beds, people living very close to each other, which is not safe during COVID. And so we're not going to be able to sort of scoot people away. We're going to see them a lot more. In terms of livability of the city, I think, I live in the Castro, and so I have homeless folks all over the place. I think, we're going to need to create, we have the hotels, so that actually has kind of taken care of the loss of shelter capacity. We need more housing. We need some more safe sleep. It's expensive for what it is. I know people are reading a lot about it in the papers. We've never wanted to do sanctioned sleep encampments for various reasons, not the focus of today. But if we're going to do them, we need to make them more affordable for what they are. And we need to make them longer term, because a month here and a month there is a lot of work, and it's upheaval and not trauma informed for people staying there. But I think we also know that there's some ability from a health perspective, like in the Tenderloin, we need people who are unsheltered to move away from people's doorways, to move away from businesses as things open back up. So where are they going to go? Right? And so there's going to be even more shuffle and movement of our unsheltered population, pushing them around the city. And frankly, they will not land, because our society won't let them land, in front of fancy houses. They will land in front of the houses in poorer neighborhoods that are more impacted. So it'll be harder for businesses in the Tenderloin and the Bayview to open and do well than it will be for someone on Fillmore Street. That's just sort of the reality. And so back to this equity conversation, the city is extremely focused on ensuring that things like sidewalk dining and slower streets are being equitably distributed around the city. Not my lane at all, but very important, so that businesses in every community can reopen and rebuild.
Thank you, Abigail. And it's Friday afternoon. We're almost at the end.
Happy hour.
Yes, just about. I wish we could all celebrate it together. If you have more questions and comments, please send them to either Miriam or me. But for right now, what I'd like to do, and thank you so much for your participation, your interest, your really good and insightful questions, and your support. We will be sending, as I mentioned, we'll be sending out materials next week, a link to this. So everything here today has been recorded, as well as a survey, which we hope you'll complete. Now what I want to do is turn this over to Miriam, who will share her thoughts of her own with you and close today's session. And many of you are here today because of Miriam. And if you know Miriam, you know that she is one of the best community activists and a very generous philanthropist here in the city. She's deeply involved in making San Francisco a better place to live. Miriam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kathie, for the kind words. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate your good questions and thoughtful suggestions. And I hope that you were able to gain some good information from this conversation. I know this is something that many of you have reached out in knowing the participation I've had and working as part of this initiative. And I want to just thank Sherilyn and Abigail for doing this really hard work during this difficult time. And I cannot imagine what you experience on a daily basis. I know this is difficult for me when I hear the stories from you. So thank you for your dedication to our city. We are humbled by your work, so thank you. I wanted to talk about why Rising Up has been so important to me and has set with me well personally, and I've been involved from the very beginning in support of the initiative. And I think about my own two sons, many of you who know them almost at age of 21 and 18. And they are officially legally considered adults. And I think about the love and support and mentorship that my husband Orrin and I have provided for them, and how lucky we are to be able to do that. And I think about just recently during the COVID and pandemic and quarantine period, how quickly we were able to bring back our older son from college from Boston and provide him with a safe and healthy environment during the quarantine period. And then I've been thinking a lot about the young people that we were addressing, who are mostly at the same age of some of our children, and who, as Abigail and Sherilyn mentioned, are living on the streets. They're living in tents or a friend's couch. They have no mentors, no families. In many cases, no one to even care about them or care about what they are doing. And especially given this difficult time, I can't even imagine my boys being in that position. So even as young adults at that age, they need the support and guidance that we all needed at that age that our kid kids need, and we provide that for them on a daily basis. So this is why I'm very vested to be part of this initiative. I'm honored to be part of this initiative. And as Sherilyn and Abigail mentioned, this is an initiative in partnership with the city, the San Francisco Homelessness Department, led by Abigail, Larkin Street, led by Sherilyn, and the 6 excellent youth service organizations that we have here, and all with the goal of reducing youth homelessness, even with the threat of continuing pandemic. So, we did not intend for this roundtable to be a fundraising session. It really is, I'm hoping for it to be a series of sessions where we can bring awareness and share the current situation with our community, as I have been able to learn more and more about. And we'd love to hear from you if this is something of an interest that we can continue to do with other organization leaders in partnerships with us going forward. So I think Kathie, in a way that you could help, will be following up with a survey, asking you questions and suggestions as to how we can continue, and if we should continue this series, and how that could be useful. And we'd love to hear back from you on that. And most importantly, if you have interest in learning more about Rising Up, if you have input, questions, suggestions, we would love to get together with you. You can reach out to Kathie Lowry directly or myself, and we'd be happy to make time at your convenient time. And we have more time than before nowadays. And really, thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm grateful. And I hope for everyone to have a safe and healthy weekend.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Miriam.
No one could have said it better. Thank you. And have a great weekend, everyone. And you'll hear from us next week.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.